In Gaza, we are witnessing collective punishment, destruction and displacement of human lives on a horrific and unprecedented scale. Ongoing indiscriminate bombing has turned a chronic humanitarian crisis into a catastrophe. And for those who do survive, there is an imminent risk of death by disease and starvation. Millions are displaced, but where are they to go? Because as I speak, there is simply no safe space left for those fleeing from Rafah. It would be helpful if the Minister today updates us as to where he thinks people are to flee to. Previously, many of us have called for safe routes when Russia invaded Ukraine and some visa schemes were set up for Ukrainians. And so how can it be that there are no safe routes for Palestinians to reach sanctuary in the UK, even if they have family here? So how can it be that there are no safe routes for Palestinians to reach sanctuary in the UK, even if they have family here? In fact, humanitarian visa routes are rarely available to Palestinians in any form, despite 1 in 6 of the world's refugees being Palestinian. I've spoken in this House repeatedly, asking why Palestinians are all too often treated differently. The dehumanization, the devaluation of Palestinian life has been so stark and, to be totally frank, utterly appalling. I know that many of my constituents have been utterly shocked at the racism, the Islamophobia and the double standards. Something has been fundamentally broken or revealed, however you look at it. The political establishment has totally been out of touch with the majority of British people on this, and I think this will not be easily forgotten. Young people across East London ask me, how is it that the government condemns certain countries for their human rights records and crimes but not others? Why is it that it seems that the right to self-determination is spoken about for some and not others? Why are some national flags celebrated and others denigrated, even effectively banned? Why are some deaths mourned and others explained away? Why is it that for the government, too many Palestinians have been killed or that too many are starving, but there is no condemnation of who killed them or who is starving them? I, as many across the UK and around the world, have always been opposed to the bombing and displacement of civilians, but this government has supported it in Gaza. What did they think would happen when they supported the openly declared intent to reduce the entire Gaza Strip to rubble? Whenever this government have been asked about what the long-term plan was for millions of civilians in Gaza, they have been unable to answer.
The current system just simply isn't working because the requirement to enrol biometrics at a visa application centre is simply impossible to meet. The one in Gaza is closed. You can't get to Ramallah or Jerusalem. In effect, people are caught in this really sickening Orwellian catch-22 where they cannot enrol their biometrics because they can't leave Gaza, and they can't leave Gaza because they can't enrol their biometrics. This is a sickening situation to leave people in. Does she agree that that is yet more evidence of the need for this bespoke family reunion scheme, just as was done, as she has said, in Ukraine and Hong Kong as well?
We have rehoused a number of people from Gaza who came as family members of British Gazans when the war broke out. And what I have seen from my constituency is the open-hearted nature to help those families, that any concern about what is actually a relatively small group of people that this visa scheme would apply to, about there not being resource. And in fact, all of the Gazans that we resettled into Birmingham Yardley were actually doctors and are bringing huge amounts of resource. And that actually our communities, even in the face of the racism she talks about, are ready with open arms to help.
If I could just raise the case of my constituent Emily Fairs, who has multiple family members. They were in Rafah. Half of them have now disappeared because they were afraid in anticipation of the likely Israeli military campaign there. And what she tells me is that these are people who have degrees, who have skills, who could offer so much here if only the door was not so resolutely closed against them. Yeah. And it just begs the question, how is the humanitarian question being answered here in the UK, and why are we refusing the skills of these people?
There are reports that almost half of the agricultural land in Gaza has been destroyed, and this morning it said the health system across Gaza could collapse within a few hours. Would you agree with me this is just only adds to the urgency of this government doing all it can to provide safety for those fleeing this horrific conflict?
I would absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and indeed food security is something that deeply concerns.
Like many people I'm sure in this room, was very proud to be able to intervene in support of Ukrainian refugees who were being accommodated by friends and family in this country. Having a large Afghan community, many people were disappointed at not having a similar treatment. Once again, many people who have family and friends in the Palestinian community feel that there should be some degree of parity of treatment for people based on need rather than where the conflict originated.
The government position outlined in their response to the petition in December is that the UK recognises that there are people impacted by the war who may wish to join family in the UK. However, the government is not making plans to create a bespoke pathway for Palestinians. Whilst the government states that Palestinians can come to the UK through existing immigration routes, the petitioners wished that I draw particular attention to the lack of safe routes out of Gaza for Palestinians and indeed for anyone in a conflict zone. For their application to even be considered by the Home Office, people must attend visa application centres to give their biometric data. But there is no VAC in Gaza, that's closed, and they can't get through to Jerusalem or Ramallah. And until recently, of course, they could pay thousands of US dollars to get out by a private company to Egypt over the Rafah border, but that's now impossible because of the situation at the Rafah border. That is another option closed off, and Gazans are now effectively trapped with no way of giving their biometrics. There is an option to apply for a deferred biometric enrolment, but since the start of the conflict in October, I understand that every single request for deferral in Palestine has been refused by the Home Office. The immediate priority, however, must be Gaza, given the devastation of the conflict and the lack of support being provided to Palestinians in surrounding countries. As with Hong Kong and Ukraine, we can see a very clear need for a visa scheme for Palestinians. The petitioners are asking a very basic question. Why should people living in the UK not be able to apply to sponsor their family members to keep them safe whilst this conflict is ongoing? If we were able to implement a visa scheme for the people of Ukraine, why can we not implement a similar visa scheme for the people living in Gaza? Of course, I'm just going to make a bit of progress. Of course, there must be a right of return attached to any scheme, and sadly the history of the region has all too often been one of dispossession and loss, and it is essential that any Palestinian leaving Gaza is able to return to rebuild their lives there as soon as they feel able to do so. There is a very real feeling amongst Palestinians I've spoken to that those who have watched in horror the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, that Palestinian lives somehow do not matter as much as those caught up in other conflicts. I hope the Minister today will disabuse this notion, certainly as far as the government is concerned, by responding positively to this petition.